Excellent. So I am very excited today to introduce our ingredient experts. I am Hunter Buffington, the Executive Director for the Hemp Feed Coalition. We are a membership organization working to gain legal federal approval for hemp as an animal feed ingredient. And a secondary mission of ours is to commoditize waste products and help stabilize the hemp supply chain, make sure that our farmers and processors have all the opportunities in the world to really make sure that they can make a living. And getting hemp recognized as animal feed is a huge step in that direction, and also in securing the absolute best health and wellness for our animals and our food supply chain. With that in mind, I'm really excited to introduce your panelists today to answer questions and really talk about the importance of certificates of analysis, how we use them, the information that we're gathering, and how I'm also working very hard to make sure that we protect our farmers and our processors as we gather information that is going to become publicly available and used to help us build the case to the FDA and the Center for Veterinary Medicine to approve hemp as an animal feed ingredient. With that, I'd like to introduce our members. These are our expert farmers and processors and laboratory professionals who agree to give of their expertise and their time on our ingredients work group. The Hemp Feed Coalition functions by the expertise and time that is shared by volunteers. So we literally cannot do this work without the excellent folks that you're going to have access to today. We're going to talk probably for about a half an hour, but you can absolutely put questions into the Facebook stream, and we're excited to engage directly with our constituents. With that, I would like the Ingredients Committee to go ahead and introduce themselves and maybe share briefly how it is that you came to be with the Hemp Feed Coalition. Swan, would you like to start?
Sure. Hi, my name is Swan Rey, and I'm a supply chain development specialist with the University of Minnesota's Regional Sustainable Development Partnerships. I work in a variety of capacities throughout Minnesota to develop emerging crops, engineered through traditional plant breeding at the University of Minnesota, particularly cover crops and regeneratively grown cropping systems. And I also do food systems work. I started into hemp about a year ago, primarily because developing supply chains is what I'm fascinated with. And it was the hottest kind of commodity on the scene in terms of development. And I quickly identified that hemp was going more towards CBD, but there were a lot of issues with the supply chain, and that growers and producers in the state of Minnesota were losing their shirts, so to speak. So so my interest had developed mostly around the grain and how I could be of service in moving the grain supply chain forward and identifying bottlenecks that are present in hemp grain supply chain development. And that's what led me to the Hemp Feed Coalition, because a huge bottleneck is obviously utilizing this crop as a feed source. And so that's what brought me here.
Thank you, Swan. Vanessa, would you like to go next?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Vanessa Snyder. I am the Business Development Director with Eurofins, assisting the hemp industry. And Eurofins is an ISO-accredited third-party testing laboratory, and we have labs, global lab network, and have been testing in the food and beverage and dietary supplement space for over 80 years. And what led me to the Hemp Feed Coalition really is just being able to assist the industry, not only from the CBD side and more the supplement side, but also to help, obviously get this as an approved ingredient for animal feeds. And Eurofins has a long time expertise with testing for different pet products and animal feeds. We have representatives that assist on different committees such as AOAC and AFCO. So we're really happy to be able to partner with the Hemp Feed Coalition, perform some of the testing to get the ingredient definition out there. So thanks for having me today. I look forward to the discussion.
Excellent. Thank you, Vanessa. Dion, would you like to introduce yourself?
Can everybody hear me now? I had a little technical difficulty.
We can hear you.
Awesome. My name is Dion Oakes with Wright LLC in Southern Colorado. We have a food processing facility along with a partnership in a CBD processing facility, and we're just really interested in farming this for the farmers long term and getting the hemp feed side going. So this is something that really interests me, and any way I can be a part of, it's very exciting. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Dion. Greg, how about you?
Hi, my name is Gregg Gnecco. I'm out here in the Northwest, Oregon, Washington. I'm the co-founder of Hemp Northwest. We're a food processor in Oregon, the first to work with grain in the Northwest. I also now work with INDHEMP full-time as well. And when we started processing the first crop in 2018, the first load came out of a combine that had some wheat in it. And wheat in a human food gluten-free product is a contaminant. And it led us to look for what are the other markets that this seed or this hemp seed oil that is otherwise a food-grade product could enter the marketplace. And that's when we learned the challenges facing hemp feed and the realization that most people don't know that you can go to the grocery store and buy these food products and take them home and feed them to your grandma and your infant, but you cannot feed it to your horse or to your pig and then eat the bacon. And that's why we're here to try to help policy and get to the point where common sense prevails and the most nutritious food source on the planet can be fed to animals everywhere.
Excellent. Thank you, Greg. Morgan, you're up.
Hi, everyone. I'm Morgan Elliott. I'm the VP of Operations for INDHEMP and one of the co-founders as well. And we're in Fort Bend, Montana, and we are an oilseed and fiber processor. My background is chemical engineering, and I worked for a large agricultural company before this. And so I recognized really early on that there was a huge opportunity in the feed industry and that there was a need for diversity in our ingredients. And so I echo pretty much everything that everyone said, especially Greg, about the just the logistics of, being able to feed it to our kids and not being able to feed it to our dogs and our horses. And so there's just some real hurdles ahead of us that I don't think any of us quite understood getting into the business. And we're just trying to come together, and Hemp Feed Coalition provides a great platform for us to work together to try and tackle some of those hurdles.
Excellent. Thank you, Morgan. John, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm John Strohfus. I'm the founder and CEO of Minnesota Hemp Farms here in Hastings, Minnesota. And we started growing hemp back in 2016 under the first year pilot program in Minnesota. We've been active legislatively and also, as Swan shared, trying to build out supply chains. So especially for us being one of the first in the early pilot programs, we have some semblance of supply chain today, 5 years later, but back then it was very, very fragmented. And so we put together a group of growers and a toll processing group that works to process our products into food products. We have local tolling here and then also some in Canada. And we sell food ingredients under the Minnesota Hemp Farms brand, and then we have a retail brand, which is actually that side. I get your image. Field Theory, which is in supermarkets under consumer packaged good initiatives in retail. But like everybody who processes hemp directly or indirectly, we have the challenge of matching oil production to cake production or hemp meal, and the balance that goes back and forth based on the demands. So that's a challenge, a significant challenge for everybody in the industry, and it is very disruptive at times to the supply chain, both from product availability, whether you have too much oil or not enough, or too much cake and not enough, and then pricing, which relates to farmer contracting prices as well. So the livestock hemp feed side of it is extremely important, and that's why I'm happy to be part of this group.
Excellent. Thank you, John. And I really want to give a big thank you to the U.S. Hemp Growers Conferences and Expos, and especially Caitlin Christensen. She is our fearless technical leader. So she's going to be monitoring the chats and helping to make us all look great this morning on our webinar. So my thanks, Caitlin. If you just want to say hi, that would be great.
Hello, everybody. I am glad to be helping out with the second webinar I have had the privilege of doing with the Hemp Feed Coalition. So we just look forward to your questions, and everybody have a great day.
Excellent. All right, so I wanted to get us started with a conversation about the difference between de-illegalization and actual legal approval. 2 years ago, when I began working in this role, the most common question that I got was, is this going to get my cows high? And while that was, it seemed very frustrating at the time, it was also a somewhat enjoyable conversation because it was so much enthusiasm around learning more about this plant and all of the applications and potential uses. The frustration for me now is that 2 years later, the question that I get most asked often is, why isn't it legal? I thought it was already legal. And so I wanted to start our conversation by really explaining a little bit of the legalities, and that will take us into the importance of certificates of analysis. So while hemp has been de-illegalized, and many of you are probably familiar with the GRAS notifications that allow hemp seed oil, hemp hearts, and whole seeds to be consumed by humans, that does not actually include approval for animals to then consume hemp as a feed ingredient. So the process is actually more difficult to gain federal approval through the FDA and the Center for Veterinary Medicine for those animal feed ingredients, and then for those byproducts to actually enter the human food supply. So our goal with the Hemp Feed Coalition is to go through the federal regulatory process to ensure that hemp is actually recognized as an animal feed ingredient. And that includes not only all of the byproducts that come from the oil seed itself, but other opportunities for byproduct material. I know that there's probably going to be some great questions about post-extracted pulp material, as well as silage or forage from other materials. And I'm saying those things to you guys because I'm hoping that will help facilitate some questions. But the reality is that it is okay to feed hemp to your animals on your own property. The legal issues are actually around marketing any hemp-fed animal products. So making sure that if you are feeding animals on your own property or your own operation, that is technically okay, but you cannot market any of those animal products or that feed product technically until we gain legal approval. I don't want to spend a lot of time unless there's specific questions about what that legal process looks like. What I do want to share with everyone who's joined us today is that there are two distinct pathways. One goes directly to the FDA and Center for Veterinary Medicine through a feed additive petition. That pathway is specific to formulations that include an ingredient and is designated for manufacturers and formulators. As a nonprofit coalition, our pathway does not lie in the feed additive petition. Rather, our opportunity is to work through the American Association of Feed Control Officials to get a new ingredient definition approved for each of those byproducts. And what that looks like is we have to present the case for the ingredient itself. This includes homogeneity to show that regardless of where it's grown, how it's processed, or what varietal it is, that the nutritional composition is consistent across the country. This is going to lead us to the certificate of analysis question. The other thing that we have to do is we have to show that we understand the potential contaminants and the potential anti-nutritives for each species that could potentially be fed hemp. So you start thinking about how much information it's going to take for us to actually convince FDA CVM that this is a safe and effective and consistently nutritious product. And then we also have to do a lot of testing and research around safety, toxicity, and efficacy for each one of those target species for each ingredient that we intend to feed. So it's very much a two-step process, but the engagement of the Hemp Feed Coalition is to really build the case for that for the ingredient to show the homogeneity. And that's why it's so important to get certificates of analysis from multiple producers across the country, from multiple processors across the country, and with as much information showing varietals as possible. And one last thing to share with you guys before we talk more about those COAs is that we are not allowed to present information from outside of the United States in our arguments to AFCO or to FDA CVM. So we are beholden to use only American produced, only American processed information, data, and nutritional composition. So when you think about 88 years of prohibition, and it's unfortunate that we're the only country that ever stopped eating or feeding hemp to our animals, but the reality is that this is why certificates of analysis are so important, because we have to overcome that 88 years of not being able to utilize this plant, research it, or learn from it. So that brings me to what we really want to talk about is how those certificates of analysis really help us, why we need them, and how we're going to use them. So I think what I would like to do, you guys got access to an incredible panel here, so hopefully some of you are beginning to share some questions that you would like. But when we talk about certificates of analysis, there's a lot of reasons why we really need those. So I would love to stop talking so much and ask some of our panelists to jump into this conversation. And the first thing that we wanted to cover was really, how is this going to further the industry? And I think Swan, being our supply chain specialist, when we think about getting certificates of analysis and what we need to know about the ingredient, that would be a great question for you to answer if you want to jump in. What do you think? You're on mute. There you go.
I was having some bandwidth issue as well, so I didn't hear your question.
No worries. What I had said is, how does getting legal approval for hemp as an animal feed really further the supply chain? And then we'll talk about what that means for the industry. But if you want to talk about ingredient approval as it applies to the supply chain with byproducts, that would be great.
Sure. So I think it's important on a lot of fronts. For producers, it means that they have an additional revenue stream for their crop that doesn't just one finished product, and that's huge. While some may have access to livestock that they can use, the transportation cost of them getting them back on the farm from the processing facility can be costly, and they may not have livestock. To Minnesota and Midwest processors, it is definitely a source of revenue for them as well. And I think what we're seeing on the landscape is like a hybrid mix of illegal activity around it, which we don't want to see for obvious reasons, as we're legitimizing the industry overall. Or you see a lot of it going to waste, which from an environmental perspective is costly as well. On the ingredient analysis side, it's so important that we have the data that we need. I'm linked with some research centers at the University of Minnesota. The Plant Protein Innovation Center does a protein analysis and currently engaged in research. And just having more information just helps move the industry forward. And it really starts with sharing information and getting more data points all together.
Excellent. Thank you, Swan. And I would love to hear from some of our producers, really, what does that mean for you guys to be able to utilize these byproducts and have a market for them? Dion or John, do you want to jump in on that? Go ahead, Dion.
Yeah, so I mean, the biggest thing that we have a huge value for if we can get this going is really that extra revenue stream for that product. I mean, there's the hemp protein powder out there that a lot of people use and see in the supermarkets today, but having another big source for this cake meal, anything like that to go to is a huge deal. Not just for the farmers, producers, but all the end users of this as well, going to feed yards or whatever it may go into. So it means a lot to us because that kind of byproduct that we have kind of stacks up. And if we can have a place to move it, it definitely will help out the farmers in the long term and get their interest even further.
Excellent. Thank you, Dion. And John, do you want to jump in and talk a little bit about how you utilize hemp as an ingredient?
Sure. So just kind of tagging on to Dion's comments and also kind of what I opened with in comments, I think the most significant benefit for the industry to have the livestock feed use is not only the benefit of the ingredient itself for the animal, but to help support price stability and contract and scalable growth of the industry. Hemp is a very niche ingredient right now, whether it's eaten raw or used in a downstream food product. And it's very difficult to have a food quality product. So there's chance that grain might not make food grade processing. And then what do you do with it? And a farmer who is trying to make food grade and then doesn't, if they don't have an opportunity to sell that and at least recover their input costs for the crop, let alone the disappointment of making a profit, those are one of the things that will stifle off any future growers from wanting to participate if they've had that negative experience. So having a livestock feed outlet is really critical in that regard, because we have secondary non-food grade use for the raw grain. And then the second side of it is the supply and demand balancing. So a couple years ago, it was hard to give away a drum of hemp seed oil, and about 18 months ago, and the hemp protein or the meal was in demand then. And this is probably actually about 3 years ago. So basically you were pressing grain to make protein, and then the oil was the byproduct and you couldn't get rid of it. Now, or 18 months ago, when we had the CBD boom, you couldn't keep enough oil in stock, and that was creating, 3/4 of the weight of the grain in press cake, and there was no significant uptake in the food side of it. So everybody had all this meal that they're trying to figure out what to do, and of course, as you store it for a long time, it's harder and harder to keep that food grade. So it has to go into the livestock system at scale, and that I think is most important. And then in our operation, because we're growing hemp, we're also feeding it to our cattle, and we're actually marketing that a little bit, pushing the envelope with USDA boundary for inspected meat. But we're doing that, we feel, under the guise of we're growing our own, these are our own cattle, and we're not marketing as a feed input. And so far, USDA has not come back and said that that's an adulterant in the meat supply.
Yeah, just a little bit of a highlight of where we need to go and the importance of getting this legal approval, right? So the next question, I would love to hear from INDHEMP, and I want to take a moment and thank them. They are our champion, helping to facilitate completion of the first ingredient application using hemp seed cake and meal as a protein supplement for laying hens. Again, we can't do this work without all of our constituents, and especially those champions that make it possible for us to complete those applications. So thank you, INDHEMP, for being here. And I would love to hear from you guys. Tell us a little bit about the potential of the grain market and really what that looks like, especially if we can get legal approval for animal feed.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Greg, feel free to add anything to it. But it's been great to work with the Hemp Feed Coalition, and we recognized from an early standpoint, we weren't the experts by any means of getting a feed additive petition or an ingredient submission. And so being able to collectively come together and use the expertise and then leverage that experience and using consultants where we need to, I think has gotten us where we are today. And the fact that we're pushing forward this ingredient definition with laying hens, which Hunter has, championed as well and done a fantastic job. So unfortunately, no one will ever know the hours that were spent or the conversations that were had. And it's just a thankless job. But, from a grain perspective and what our producers see, it all goes back to, our business and our mission statement is to try to create opportunities with growers and connect them to the potential consumers that see hemp as a real resource. And definitely the health benefits that we see from the human side, why wouldn't we see the same things in our animals? And, I think we're doing a disservice to our animals by not allowing those ingredients into the supply chain. But every opportunity that we have to create more value that we can then push back down through to our producers and allowing them to have hopefully a larger margin on their crop, that's a win-win for everyone. And so, yes, it definitely affects the profitability and sustainability of the hemp industry businesses and processors in general, but hopefully producers also see this as a huge win for them and understand the ripple effect that this will have. If we can create not only just the legality of getting hemp into feed, but then really capitalize on the value that has as an ingredient and what it could potentially mean. We're talking like show horses or these bulls that people spend a lot of money on because they have a lot of interest in genetics and calving cows. There's so many different things you can look to see real potential. I think we all understand that we are what we eat, and animals are no different. And so if we can create value in this ingredient and introduce it into a feed stream, I think that you'll see the ripple effect go through it in multiple levels of the ag industry.
Excellent. Greg, did you want to add anything to that? I know you guys have some really well-loved horse cookies. So, thoughts?
Yeah, we can sell them in Oregon and Washington because in Oregon and Washington, horses are regulated by the State Department of Agriculture. I wasn't going to go here, but since you took us here, that's one of the other things that we need. And I mean, you're getting right to the point. I was going to kind of say that John kind of made the point that I was going to make, and I'll just reinforce it, that from a processor point of view, when you're trying to help farmers with this crop the first time and it doesn't meet the grade, that is a hard conversation to have. Whether, we had a bin that got a little damp, it had a mold count, we couldn't use it as a food product, and these markets don't exist yet. And so I think that's where it starts is we need to be able to create these markets to support the producer so that they have a way to get in and learn hemp. I mean, I was on a farm the other day and, there was a whole bunch of guys standing around and they're not used to cutting with a combine anything that green and how to handle it and maintain it as a food crop from there. But yeah, going to echo on, you took us into marketing and horse, and Morgan brought up, being able to be legal to where we can market the value, for those higher end products. That really is where we need to get to because, when you look at the detail of the amino acid profiling, now we are starting to get and share some of these COAs. Most feed buyers look at crude fat, crude protein, and a percentage and a cost per pound. And the difference with hemp seed, I've got some hemp cake right here, is that the detail of that amino acid profile is actually more complete and more unique than you're going to find in a soy or another type of feed product. And until we can market the benefits of those and the details, we're not going to be able to add value. So we've got multiple pathways. It all starts with, getting the initial approvals and fast tracking things as quick as possible, because on one side we have the ability to go to market and develop these markets, and on the other side we've got producers that are trying to diversify and grow this new crop for the first time and need access to markets if they don't hit a home run the first time.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for answering those questions. There's so much expertise on this panel, and that was a really great segue to have a conversation about what we are actually measuring in those certificates of analysis. And Vanessa, I would love for you to talk about contaminants. And the reason that I want to talk about contaminants at a little more detail is because this is really where FDA CVM has some concerns and why we need to be able to collect this data. So Vanessa, do you want to provide some insight?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's obviously contaminants aren't the exciting part of this when you're speaking to how great the ingredient is and marketing it. That's why we're testing for all the nutritive benefits. So the amino acids, the fatty acids, the vitamins, the minerals. But much like any product, when you're testing it, you need to test for what should be in there, and then, of course, what you do not want to be in there. So you're looking at your pesticide profiles, your mycotoxins, and heavy metals. So Eurofins has been testing various samples for the pesticide profiles and those additional contaminants. But the importance with getting other CFAs is to really compile that data to show that, you know, there is no transfer of those contaminants into these ingredients. Obviously, you can even consider the potency test, you know, making sure the THC is below the limit as a potential contaminant. And I'm really lucky to have the support of the Eurofins team. We have Grace Bandong, who is our global contaminants lead, who has really been in charge of leading the efforts of what we should be testing in terms of pesticides and which profiles or panels we should be testing in hemp and various hemp products. And then Lars Ryman, one of our chief science officers, that has been helping to develop the profile of what we should be testing for, including both those nutritive.
Excellent. And Vanessa, and in fact, the entire ingredients team, we spent a long time reviewing assays and really developing the list of analysis that in trying to anticipate what FDA CVM was going to have for questions, and also really developing a complete nutritive and contaminant profile. So one of the things that I think would be great to mention at this point in time is that for the grain industry, and specifically the oil seeds, cannabinoids are treated as a contaminant. The oil seed itself does not naturally produce cannabinoids, and so this is a really important place where your data helps us to show that it is in fact a contaminant in those oil seeds, and to also present an argument that allows for any of the oil seeds produced from any varietal to potentially fall into the standards that we are setting and be able to be utilized as that ingredient product for animal feed. So what I'd like to do now is talk a little bit more about the information that we're trying to gather and really how we're going to be using that. I'm not sure, Caitlin, if we're getting any questions. I'm focused on talking right now, but this would be a great time for you guys to add any questions, because we'll be going to those questions here pretty quickly. So I hope that you guys can hear that the real motivation for the Hemp Feed Coalition is to support the industry as a whole. We're not moving forward with any development of intellectual property. Our goal is to instead open up these markets for all of the producers, the farmers across the country, as well as the processors and the livestock markets, as well as our companion horses. So really the idea here is to not further any one individual product, but again, rather to set the parameters for the legal argument for hemp and its byproducts as that animal feed ingredient. So the way that we use the information is when certificates of analysis are shared with me, and I'll put up my email at the end of our conversation today, I assign them a sample ID. I'm the only person that will actually see your certificates of analysis in their entirety. Once the sample ID is assigned, we then take the data, we literally put it into a data table. We run statistical analysis on those data points. And my thanks to Morgan at INDHEMP for a lot of data point analysis. But the idea there is that we scrub the data so that we're getting the best information. And the only thing that is really pivotal that we keep with each of those sample IDs is the state that it's produced in. If it's processed in a different state, that's helpful, but really what state is it produced in? And also what is the varietal? That information we then compile, and we use that to set the parameters for what an improved feed ingredient would look like. So for example, when we have crude protein amounts, there was variation that we saw between 20% all the way up to 40%, although that 20% was a single outlier. The average is definitely around 30% for that crude protein. But in being able to collect as many certificates of analysis and as many data points as possible, it allows us to be as inclusive with as many varietals as we can possibly be. The goal, again, is to make sure that the industry as a whole has access to these markets, and we're not promoting a single varietal, a single producer, or a single processor. The reality is that as an industry, this is an opportunity for all of us to flourish if we share our information. And those data points, again, we have no information for the last 88 years. And I'm very excited that 39 individuals shared their certificates of analysis with the Hemp Feed Coalition for inclusion in our application. And without that data and without that information, with 11 different states presenting that, and again, 39 certificates of analysis and almost 20 different producers and processors, we cannot make the argument that this ingredient is homogeneous across the United States. And we also don't want to set standards without knowing what the ingredient actually looks like when you guys are producing it and processing it. So this is really an opportunity for you to share this information so that we can do the best possible job representing the industry and making sure that FDA CVM really understands that this is an industry-wide product and that it is in fact consistent. The other thing that I want to share with you guys is that we do have to actually share the certificates of analysis in our packet. Because we're going the AFCO route, this does not immediately become publicly available. But to ensure, again, anonymity, I do redact all of the submitter information on those certificates of analysis when they go into the packet. My goal is to make sure that we're protected and also to encourage you to be willing to share that information so that as we develop this database, if we determine that there in fact are anti-nutritives or concerns in certain geographical areas over heavy metals, for example, in the soils, that we can begin to identify that and also become a resource for the industry and for the FDA CVM and the USDA as they try to learn more about this crop. It's really amazing how little information they have. And we have an incredible opportunity to be stakeholders and to really control and present that information to our regulators. The other thing I want to share as well is that when you submit a certificate of analysis, then you will also be invited to view the complete data set. So by sharing a single certificate of analysis, my team and I will then share with you the actual data set. You'll see it with the sample IDs, but then you'll have an idea of what the nutritive values look like across the country and with other varietals. So it's definitely a give and take as we go through that information. So is there anybody else that would like to add some more information, or Caitlin, do we have some questions that we can pose?
Yeah, Hunter, I'll jump in real quick if you don't mind. To support that, it's easy to think, the idea of being the first to industry with an ingredient or whatnot, the idea of that is enticing, but I really encourage people to look at this as a collaborative effort and how big of a hurdle this is for us to undertake, not only financially, but it takes a lot of I call it bandwidth, a lot of time and attention to detail that most people just don't have that access to. And so the idea that IP is not on the table, and you being able to come together as a coalition and to share these certificates definitely helps with the idea of understanding that you're going to be protected. Your data is not just shared for everyone to have for their picking. It's really towards a good effort that is utilized well. And I think from a processor standpoint, we recognize that, like I said, the hurdle and hill in front of us is years in the making. And so if we chip away at it slowly and we start to continue to create relationships and potentials for information to be shared, we are the experts, and we do have to educate the regulators. And that seems a little cumbersome, and you would think that maybe the regulators should be self-educated, but that's part of a growing industry. And so it's important for the right voices to be heard and the right information to be articulated. If we leave it to chance of what's going to be distributed and what's going to be understood, there's a huge misunderstanding about cannabinoids. There's a huge misunderstanding about the hemp seed oil versus CBD oil. And so it's very important that the right people have the microphone to educate the regulators that are going to definitely prevent the longevity of this commodity. And so this is a great forum to stand behind, because I think absolutely we have the right people behind the microphone and articulating the right information. And certificates of analysis, let the science speak for itself. And that's where we're trying to do that. And as everyone knows, it's all about presenting it in a fashion that they can understand, and in numerical values that make sense to them, because they're looking at ingredient definitions all the time, every day. But unfortunately, hemp has a stereotype that it's working against, and it's very important for us to communicate with scientific data that's proven across the country, across varietals, that we can stand behind these ingredients.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Morgan. And I'm trying to address some of the questions. I'm just having trouble seeing those. Caitlin, can you ask some questions for me while I find that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would be glad to go through some of the questions that we have so far. So the first question that was asked was, please bear with me, it was about half an hour ago when, shortly after we kicked everything off. Looks like JT Taylor here had some questions regarding why are pesticides and herbicides and GMO legal and they're widely promoted while hemp is illegal. And he goes on to kind of elaborate on that, trying to figure out how he's able to share some information with the Hemp Feed Coalition, and asking if pesticides are considered contaminants.
Yeah, Vanessa, do you want to answer that? Also, this is a conversation that Morgan and I have also had at great length. So if you two ladies want to jump in.
Yeah, I can take a few points of that. So yes, pesticides would fall under the realm of contaminants. The problem is with pesticides, there are thousands that can be used. So, when you're considering what you need to test for, at Eurofins, we developed a list specific for hemp. So it encompasses more of the higher risk compounds we would think we would find there. I think that addressed the question in terms of contaminants, but
I think to clarify, what helps is there's thresholds. And so the word contaminants, I think, gives people the impression that if you anything, it's a no-go. But there's thresholds that things are measured against. And so pesticides are used in conventional growing, and it's where agriculture is today. I'm not going to get on a soapbox against organic versus conventional. It's just recognizing what's in industry today, and then how are we protecting our finished ingredients. So there's a measured threshold that we consider a contaminant. So when we see pesticides being used, there are labels that talk about what their application timing is. A lot of time residue has like a time period that you can apply it and it still be safe to your ingredient. So it's all about the measure, and we recognize that what is available out there, we're just protecting our finished ingredients so that we know we're not contaminating and making our end consumers sick with what's available there.
Thank you guys very much. So we do have some more questions that are coming in from Facebook right now. Melissa Baldwin has joined us, and she is saying that the Kansas State University has been granted $200,000 for animal feed studies in hemp. And they wanted to know if you guys are available to collaborate with them. So if you guys could kind of let folks know not only how you work, with individuals, but how you would be able to work with a university, that would be fantastic.
Excellent. And I'll jump into that really quickly. So I'm very excited. We have been working with Kansas State as they develop assays looking specifically at cannabinoid transference and in animal feed, and then of course to the animal tissues. So it's wonderful that they got the approval to put out their press release. We're absolutely working with them. We collaborate with universities across the United States. We specifically rely on identifying principal investigators who are target species experts. So we can't do a true safety, toxicity, and efficacy study without identifying those experts. And that research, I'm sure you guys can imagine, is expensive and time consuming. And we rely on multiple researchers and universities to help us to actually do that investigation. So I'm very excited about what Kansas State is doing. I'm actually a Jayhawk. Don't hold that against me. But there's a number of universities that we're working with, including Colorado State University, North Dakota State University, North Carolina State University, and a number of others that we're just now having conversations with, including Tarleton University. And that includes species from lambs to potentially goats, beef cattle, as well as even rabbits. So there's a lot of opportunity for us to collaborate, and I would love to hear from you guys if you have researchers that you want to put us in connection with.
All right, so we have another question coming in here from Ruth Scales. She is asking what the future for small farmers who are going to be growing less than 10 acres. I presume she's referring to growing hemp for some form of animal feed.
And I'm not sure which of our producers might be best able to answer that, but I do think that small producers are definitely going to have more opportunities to interact with their local feed mill down the road, or potentially that livestock producer, even the hen house down the way. Local production and keeping those markets close is going to lower the cost for small producers, and also gives an opportunity to create that supply chain at that smaller local level where a less amount is actually helpful, instead of having, for example, 500 tons or of meal and cake as a need every single month. Obviously, that's a long-term market when we talk about that much volume. But again, I would highly recommend to make those local connections and try and maintain vertical integration. Any producers want to jump in and add to that?
This is John. I would just say that I think so I agree with what you said, Hunter. If we have livestock feed, that's going to allow for more of the forage production, that we're typical to see in other crops. Right now, in the food production, because the supply chain is so specific, meaning we're contracting or the goods that's being traded is only traded between certain producers and processors, or processors might trade a lot or something in need, but it has to be at a scale sizable enough lot size to make the food safety testing and due diligence and QA process worthy of doing. So there isn't really any lot merging that I'm aware of that's happening at a significant scale within the food processors. So typically right now, I would say, people are looking for 40 to 80 acres of production. So 40,000 pounds to 80,000 pounds of food safe, clean grain for processing in a lot. That's just kind of a couple levels of economic sense. So a grower at 10 acres for grain production, trying to get in the food supply, be very difficult to get a contract at that low production because so when we do have livestock, I think that's going to be a real help for those people who want to just try experimenting with growing hemp for the first time.
Awesome. So then the next question that I have for you guys, I've got Kristen June Jacobson here. She's just saying, hi, everyone. It's great to put some faces to the names of the people that she's been in contact with. During the process of collecting hemp seed meal from various sources, she was able to note that some producers have hemp seed meal available with specific protein percentages that differ from one another. How are these different protein percentages achieved?
Excellent. Morgan, would you like to jump in and talk about protein powder versus hemp seed meal and cake?
Yeah, for sure. So just like the plant basics, there's, varietals and new genetics are coming out all the time. And if you just look at other plant-based proteins, they're always looking, the Monsantos of the world or whoever are always looking to achieve certain characteristics in seed. So if you're looking specifically to produce more protein, there's ways you can use selective breeding practices to breed out a higher protein potential in a seed variety. So that might be the variance that you're seeing between varietals is just what the characteristic of the plant naturally. Also, you'll see with the uptake of nutrients in the soil and available water, that can also play into the amount of protein and oil that's available in the seed. So I'm not a botanist or know much about that. I just know a little bit of agronomy to be dangerous. But ultimately, I don't think it shows necessarily a bad variety. It's just what you're growing for and what the purpose is. But hemp seed meal and hemp seed protein, they can be different. In the extrusion practice that most of us use, it's a cold press extraction process where we mechanically express the oil out of the seed. And the byproduct is a cake product that Greg held up earlier in the webinar. And many times that meal is sold directly as that pellet, or it can be milled and sized, and the protein can be siphoned off by various different mechanical processes. And you can isolate that protein powder. Naturally occurring hemp seed usually has around that 30%. And many times we've seen our hemp seed meal ingredient, after looking at 40 plus COAs in that range between the 20 and 40%. And so it can depend both on the variety and how it was grown and the agronomy practices that were taken during the year. And it also can be manipulated from a processor standpoint if they are removing any of the concentration of protein that's available there. Hopefully that answered your question.
Excellent. Hey, Caitlin, I saw a question that I would like to answer while we begin to identify the last couple of questions. So Melissa Nelson Baldwin asked if we work with independent research scientists. So we do identify the principal investigators that are the species experts. However, private research is also important. Anecdotal research can be very useful to us as we build the case for safety and efficacy. And one of the questions that we try to answer for FDA CVM is, what are the impacts of long-term use of this ingredient as an animal feed? And in order to be able to answer that question, it's necessary to look at producers that have been feeding for a little while. And most folks that are interested in sharing that data are not with universities because of the legal questions around feeding hemp as an animal feed ingredient. So we absolutely do work with independent research scientists, with producers themselves, and with other folks that have been collecting data. We also like to connect them to principal investigators so that we can hopefully create a much larger body of research and evidence that we can promote or present to the FDA CVM. Excellent. Caitlin, do you have another question you'd like us to visit?
Actually, it looks like we have addressed the questions that we have gotten in at this point in time. So I guess now would just be the moment to say to everybody who's watching the live stream right now, if you've got any more questions, speak now or forever hold your peace. So anybody got anything?
Yeah, if I can make a quick point about anecdotal, and I know I just like to make the stark contrast, and we're talking about a lot of technical information here, and just to bring it back to kind of understanding, we're soliciting anecdotal information, but again, that is within the United States, within the years since the pilot program that we've been able to grow hemp here and produce things like hemp seed cake. But I just want to point out that the anecdotal evidence that we're not able to use in this process is that animals such as dogs, cats, and horses have been legal to feed hemp for many years in Canada, just across the border. And you can go online right now and you can order these products, and it's legal for them to ship them to you. But the fact that there hasn't been any known or documented adverse events in all of those years of legal feed is not what we're considering here in this anecdotal evidence, even though it exists out there. And that's why we really need everybody that does have any evidence within the United States in this very narrow playing field that we have to work with to share that information, because I just like to remind people, some of this is a laughing matter, it seems. Like, why is it that our neighbors, just miles to the north, that could grow this crop for years before we can still feed it, and we can't? And the only way that we can get there, and it really speaks to all of the people on this call that work every day to try to get their own business further and help our farmers, but also work on this issue, because nobody knows it's a huge problem, and we're the only ones that are actively working on it. Just do their work and get these grants. That's why this is a coalition, and we need to bring it all together and share as much information as we have, because even though there's a large body of work in the entire world, our regulators are looking at a narrow body that we've had of just a few years of legalization, and we need to duplicate and create and statistical analysis and push this through so we can get on with the work of creating industry.
Excellent. Thank you, Greg. Really well said. And I think that Caitlin has shared my email address. And just to reinforce what Greg said, the best way that you can support actual legalization is to share that information and data that you have with us. If you'd like to get engaged with the Hemp Feed Coalition, let me know. You can send an email to the address that's on your screen. It also requires that you become a member of the Hemp Feed Coalition in order to join any of our work groups and become a leader in our organization. You can do that for just $100 on our website. That's www.hempfeedcoalition.org. That's going to give you access to some insight and obviously the opportunity to join this fantastic group of experts and really help to lead the pathway to legal approval for hemp as an animal feed ingredient in the United States. So I really want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us today. This conversation is absolutely going to keep going. So let us know if you have more questions. And in the last minute, I just wanted to ask our panelists if they wanted to share one last thought about why this work is important to them and why they give of their time and resources. And also highlight that Eurofins does also offer a 10% discount for folks that want to work with them and help us with that effort. So thank you, everyone. That's my sign off. So panelists, any last words?
No, just appreciate everyone's engagement. Definitely want to see more people coming to the table to at least have the conversation. And advocacy is the biggest part we all play. So.
Absolutely. Anybody else? All right. Thanks so much for everyone that attended today. And I look forward to having more conversations and to getting this work done with all of the efforts that you've seen today. Your contribution really does matter and is going to help us to get this done. So thank you and have a great rest of the day.